All right, so since the last video, we've gotten a decent amount of stuff done to the car, as you can see. I'm going to go over some of that stuff, and then I also want to go back to the old chassis here and show you guys the differences in some of the tube structure and basically the changes and updates that we're doing to the new chassis and why we're doing them. So, as you can see, we got this little hole here filled up. Put a patch panel on that. Up front, we got these patch panels built and put in. We got the transmission tunnel cut out. I did get the two sides welded on. I didn't do the top yet because I'm not sure how far back it's going to go. I might end up cutting a little bit more back into the back side of the tunnel. It just depends on transmission clearance once I get the motor set in here. Got all these patch panels made. Well, actually I didn't make them. Got those from Cloud Culture Fab. He cut those out and basically just welded them in. We got all of the stitch welding on the strut towers done. So you can see that's all stitch welded together. And then started on the tube work on the front end. This is one of the things that is pretty drastically different from the old car. So we'll walk over here. You can see on the old car, we have basically, it's like a 2x3 square tubing structure that goes all the way and connects both frame rails. And then like a strut tower brace, I guess, that goes up to each strut tower. And then just a bolt-on front bash bar. And it works pretty well. It it holds the front end together. The one bad thing about this setup is because it's got that tube, that square tube structure in the front end. When I did get in a bag crash, when the car nosed into the wall, basically if it hits this side or moves that strut tower or hits the bash bar hard enough, because that's so strong, it basically pushes the whole front of the car over. So rather than taking a hit and having the damage, contained to one side, it messes up both sides of the car. So that's one thing we're going to change. You can see over on this one, it's basically a 1x1 tubing that goes across and connects both sides. Obviously there's a lot left to do on the front of this car. And rather than having a bolt-in bash bar, we're going to switch it up and do a pin-in style bash bar. So it'll have the bash bar will come out of here. It'll basically just slide in and have a pin going through it. That way we won't have bolt holes in the chassis that can get messed up. And then having the 1-inch tubing rather than that 2x3 connecting both sides, that should, if we ever do get into the wall in the front end, it'll just push one strut tower. This should be able to bend down here, and it hopefully won't mess up both sides is the goal. And then we moved it back a little bit. That should give us, the bash bar will be a little bit longer, and that will give it a little bit of extra leverage to bend and give us a little more crumple zone. Now in the rear of this car, it's super dirty right now. We kind of got the same thing going on. We've got, this one's a 3x3 square tube structure. Comes straight off the frame rails and then goes across. It's got our jacking point on it. And then it's got the braces that go up to the strut tower, you could call it. And this one, it works pretty well, but it sticks out too far. So when I do get like into walls, slide the car up into a wall, if it does bend the bash bar out of the way, I end up hitting this part. And that kind of really isn't what you want to do. So when you do get into that part, basically when you slide into the wall, you want a little bit of a cushion. And then that kind of allows you to slide into the wall and then come back out of it. With this, when I do get into the wall, so when we do get into the wall with this car, it'll hit the back and then it'll kind of bounce the car, and it usually forces you to make a correction with the front end. And you don't want to do that. The judges don't want to see that. I know I've lost a couple battles due to making corrections like that. So basically, rather than hitting that back on the wall, you can see it here. You can see it's kind of at this angle. We could, if we just touch the tire, we'd be almost hitting that tube structure. So on this new chassis, we basically got rid of that tube structure. Rather than having, you know, the big square tubing that came off like 6 inches or so, the bash bar is going to bolt right onto basically the back of the frame rail. So we plated that. So that's got a 3/16 plate on the back of it connecting the frame rail across, and then this kind of replaces that 3x3 tubing. So this will connect both sides. It kind of gives a little bit of strength to the rear end, and it'll keep those two subframe points in the right area. And then these strut tower braces, we put at more of an angle. So that should help keep the car square. And then we cut the taillight area off further. So now we don't have that third bolt hole in the back here. So that should allow the taillight to crush a little bit. The over fenders, we've got the Crown Carbon overs, and they're not on the car right now, but they flex really well. So they come back and they kind of complete this area. And then, so those can flex and the taillights can squish. And basically, until we hit the tire on the wall, we won't have anything else, you know, aside from the bash bar, which is designed to bend when we do get up into the wall. And then this is going to be, so they're bolt-on plates, but again, it's going to be a pin-in style bash bar. So you'll just be able to slide it in, take 2 pins out, and then replace it when we need to. And then I haven't decided yet, I might do another bar around the back as kind of like a secondary brace. The bash bar will be about 6 inches longer on this car, which should give it a little bit more leverage, which should make it bend easier. And that'll also help with the, you know, getting the back end into the wall and making those corrections on track. Also on this chassis, obviously we got rid of the strut tower. That'll kind of move the radiator back a little bit and allow us to sandwich the two of the radiators together. On this car, we had like the two radiators are like 3 inches apart, so we had to build like a duct between the two. But I'll go over that in another video once we get this or to that point on this car. So our next step is going to be probably get the motor in, get the motor mounts mocked up, and get the transmission in. On this car, my goal is to actually set the motor an inch further back and also an inch to the passenger side. And that's going to give us, obviously we want it as low and as far back as we can for a low center of gravity. We got the big heavy supercharger up top, so we still want to get that down and back as far as we can. And then our transmission, I run G-Force GF4A, which has a side shift. The shifter is not on there right now, but basically the whole linkage for the shifter and where it shifts the gears is over on the side there. And by moving it over a little bit, it should give us a little bit more room in the transmission tunnel and allow us to not have to cut quite so much. In that car, it's got a big panel. I can show you. So there's a big removable panel under here, and it kind of just sucks. It you know, it makes the transmission tunnel much more flimsy. I had to add a brace there. So I'd like to keep the transmission tunnel all in piece. And also on this car, when we do have to pull the transmission out, we have to pull this panel off, pull the entire shifter assembly off of the transmission, and then pull the transmission out of the car. So it makes it a lot more work. I'd like to just be able to pull the transmission out without taking the shift linkage off. And so moving the motor and transmission to the passenger side an inch should give us a little bit more room and allow us to do that. I may have to hit it with a hammer and get a little bit of clearance in there, but we'll have to mock the motor up and see where we end up. So I've got an old 5.3 here that we're going to use to mock this engine and transmission up. I don't want to pull the motor out of that car quite yet. So a couple different things we're doing on this one. For motor mounts, we actually are using these, it's called a mid plate. So it's similar to doing a motor plate setup, which would basically mount the front of the engine via a plate. This one actually just uses the stock motor mount mounting points and then has a plate coming off the side. So we'll be able to mount this directly to the chassis rather than mounting it to the subframe. That should allow us to pull the subframe out easier if we need to. It's kind of a pain right now because with the motor sitting on the subframe, if we ever need to pull the subframe out, obviously the whole motor and everything is sitting on that. So we have to support the motor somehow and then pull it out. And it just makes it a lot more work. So motor will mount up to the frame rails. I'll do some plates over here with the 3/16 tab off the side, and then we'll drill holes in those and bolt it in. And then transmission mount, it'll be similar to the old one, just moved over 1 inch. So first thing I'll do is get this motor up in the air. I'm going to pull the oil pan off and put on this new pan we've got. It's a Hawley 302-1. So it's basically one of their swap pans. It's cast aluminum. Alright, I did that cool time lapse with me dropping the motor in, and then I forgot to film anything with the motor actually in, so I pulled it out already. But we'll cover that in the next video of building the motor mounts and such. We are still making progress on this thing. Got the transmission tunnel all welded in. Did a little hole drilling and mounting. We got our catch cans mounted. There's going to be 2 of these. These are radium catch cans. We got one here, and then there's going to be a second one right next to it. Got our holes drilled in the firewall. These are 16 AN lines. This is going to be for our heat exchanger. So these 2 up here are going to be for heat exchanger. This will be for radiator down here, and that's for the coolant lines to run through the firewall. They will go into the back to the electric water pump and to the radiator back there. We did a little bit of grinding on a few things. So really all we have left in the engine bay is basically motor mounts, and then that'll be all ready for paint. So moving along, in the back started to get the floor, got the floor cut out, and the fuel cell box mounted. So the fuel cell is going to sit right in there. We cut a hole in the floor and that's just tacked in there right now. So I got some patch panels I got to weld in the back here. Alright, and there's our finished product. We got the cage all welded in. We got these plates blocking off, or to fill in the gaps over here. And we got one down over on this side, so you can see me welding. And I actually left this little opening here. This is where we're going to run the fuel lines down, and probably the Accu sump. So those will be 3 10 AM lines going through there. And then we'll run those up and through the trans tunnel. But yeah, you can fuel cells in there. That's all assembled. We're gonna run the fill hose. That'll go up and out the quarter window. We got these little window delete plates, I guess you'd call it, from Cloud Culture. And then we're gonna have a dry brake fuel setup in this car. So we'll be able to basically fill and not have to worry about spilling, and it'll just make everything quicker and easier. So I'll show you guys that setup once we get that installed. But yeah, so that'll be it for this video, and next one we'll probably cover some more cage stuff because we got quite a bit of progress on that.